In one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, the air hummed with quiet confidence. Soft music floated between tables. Crystal glasses shimmered under golden light, and powerful names were dropped in hushed tones. This was a place for big deals and bigger egos. Waiters glided through the room like ghosts, trained to be invisible, trained never to interrupt importance. At the center of it all sat a famous tycoon. Ty. He was a man known for his sharp mind, his vast fortune, and an ego that was sharper than both. His suit was flawless, his watch cost more than a house, and his posture screamed command. He was dining with two business partners who were practically falling over themselves to impress him. Laughing too hard at his jokes, nodding too quickly at his opinions. The tycoon loved the attention. He enjoyed being recognized, knowing that some people admired him and others feared him. To him, wealth was the ultimate proof of intelligence and power. Deep down, he believed that those who served him were simply beneath him. He never said it out loud, but you could see it in his eyes. A black waitress approached their table, her steps calm, her hands steady as she held a tray. Her uniform was simple but spotless, her hair tied back neatly. Her expression was pure professionalism. She greeted them with a soft but confident voice, a voice honed by years of experience. The tycoon barely glanced at her. His eyes flickered over her and dismissed her in a single cold moment. In his world, she was just part of the background, a person whose name he would never know and whose story he would never care about. He barked his order for a drink, without a please, then leaned back in his chair, already looking bored. As she stood there, pen to pad, he studied her again, not with curiosity, but with cold judgment. He noticed her accent when she spoke, light and controlled, and made a snap assumption. He decided she was simple, uneducated, someone who could never grasp the complexities of his world. A smug smirk touched his lips. He felt superior. Around them, the restaurant's gentle rhythm continued. The clink of glasses, the soft scrape of forks on plates. But at this one table, a quiet tension was building. The tycoon leaned toward his partners, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his smile dripping with arrogance. He switched to German, speaking quickly and confidently, using the language as a shield. He began making cruel, mocking comments, words designed to amuse himself and his friends at her expense. Certain the waitress wouldn't understand a single word. His partners chuckled, glancing at her and then back at him, enjoying the secret joke, safe in their bubble of language. But the waitress heard everything. Every single word landed. Yet her expression didn't change. Her pen didn't stop moving. Her hands didn't tremble. She continued writing down the order as if nothing was wrong. Inside, a lifetime of memories, stirred years of study, of travel, of sacrifice. But she kept it all locked away. She had learned long ago that dignity doesn't need to be loud. She finished taking their order, nodded politely, and thanked them before turning away. Her steps were calm and measured as she walked toward the kitchen, leaving behind a table of laughter that had no idea its time was running out. One of the business partners shifted, looking a little uneasy. Something about the moment just felt wrong, but he stayed silent. The tycoon, however, was pleased with himself. He took a sip of his drink, convinced the world worked exactly as he believed. The rich on top, the servers below. Time ticked by. The waitress returned with their drinks, placing each glass down with careful precision. Her movements were respectful, professional. For just a split second, her eyes met the tycoon's. Her gaze was steady. Not challenging, not fearful. Just aware. He felt a strange flicker of discomfort, something he couldn't quite name. But he pushed it away with another laugh, another comment to his partners. He had no idea that this quiet table, this ordinary moment, was about to completely shatter his view of the world. The restaurant remained elegant and calm, but under its polished surface, a silent lesson was waiting, ready to speak louder than money, status, or pride ever could. The waitress moved back toward the kitchen, but the words she had just heard stayed close to her mind. Not heavy, not painful, just clear. She had heard such tones before, in different countries, different languages, spoken by people who believed money gave them permission to look down on others. She took a slow breath and focused on her work. Plates needed to be served, orders needed to be filled. Life did not pause for arrogance. At the table, the tycoon leaned closer to his partners again, enjoying the comfort of his own voice. He continued speaking in German, not lowering it this time, his confidence growing with every laugh. He joked about how people like her never understood the world beyond the walls of restaurants, how serving food was probably the highest dream she could reach. His partners smiled. One of them laughed louder than before, trying hard to stay in his favor. The tycoon felt powerful, speaking freely without consequences. Language to him was a weapon and a hiding place. He believed German separated him from responsibility. It made his words invisible, safe, untouchable. He didn't notice the small pause from nearby tables, the subtle shift in air, the way one guest briefly glanced at the waitress with curiosity. Behind the scenes, the waitress placed dishes on trays, her movements smooth and practiced. Her mind, however, traveled far from this room. She remembered classrooms in different countries, long nights studying by dim light, her mother's voice encouraging her to never let the world define her limits. She remembered airports, unfamiliar streets, and the feeling of being underestimated everywhere she went. She returned to the table with the appetizers, her face calm, her posture straight. As she placed the plates down, the tycoon continued talking, his words flowing without restraint. He assumed her silence meant ignorance, that her calm meant weakness. It never crossed his mind that silence could be a choice. One of the partners shifted in his seat, the laughter beginning to sound forced. He noticed the waitress's steady expression. Something about it unsettled him. She wasn't reacting the way he expected. There was no confusion, no discomfort, no nervous smile, just quiet control. But he pushed the thought away, following the tycoon's lead. The tycoon raised his glass, still speaking in German, making one last comment meant to impress, meant to dominate. He leaned back, satisfied, convinced he had entertained the table and proven his cleverness. His laugh echoed slightly louder than the rest of the room. The waitress stood there for a moment longer than required, holding her tray, her eyes lowered respectfully. She waited until the laughter softened, until the moment felt complete. The restaurant noise continued around them, unaware that a line had been crossed. Inside her, there was no anger, no desire for revenge, only a calm certainty. She knew timing mattered more than volume. She had learned that the strongest answers were often the quietest ones. She turned away slowly, giving them space, letting their confidence settle fully before it fell. As she walked back, the manager passed by and gave her a quick nod, trusting her professionalism, unaware of the tension growing beneath the surface. The waitress paused near the counter, checking orders, aligning cutlery, doing everything expected of her, yet fully present, fully prepared. At the table, the tycoon checked his phone, replying to messages, still smiling. His world remained unchanged in his mind. He did not realize he had placed himself in the center of a moment he could not control. His wealth had always protected him before, and he expected it to do so again. Minutes later, the main course was ready. The waitress picked up the plates, her steps measured, her heart steady. This was not about pride, it was about truth. She approached the table once more. The room felt the same, elegant, calm, polite, but something invisible was shifting. As she reached them, the tycoon began speaking again in German. Casually, confidently, unaware that every word was now being weighed. Not by anger, not by ego, but by clarity. The waitress placed the final plate down gently, then lifted her eyes slightly. The table fell quiet, not because she spoke yet, but because the moment itself demanded attention. The silence stretched just long enough to feel uncomfortable, long enough to make even the tycoon pause. The laughter faded, forks rested on plates, and for the first time that evening, the power at the table felt uncertain. Something unexpected was about to rise, and none of them were ready for it. The tycoon was still leaning back in his chair when the waitress finally spoke. Her voice was calm, clear, and steady. She didn't raise it. She didn't sharpen it. She simply let it flow naturally, repeating his condescending words back to him politely, accurately, without adding or removing a single ounce of meaning. For a brief second, no one understood what had just happened. The sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade. The soft music felt distant. The business partners froze. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses hovered near lips. The German words sounded too clean, too confident to be a coincidence. The tycoon straightened slowly, his smirk fading as if someone had quietly turned off a light inside him. His eyes locked onto her face, searching for confusion, for hesitation, for a mistake. But he found none. Her pronunciation was flawless, her tone respectful, controlled, and professional. Before he could respond, she continued, switching smoothly into French, then Spanish, then Italian. Each sentence was clear and effortless. She explained the menu, the ingredients, and the preparation in each language, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if she had done this her entire life. The table was completely silent now. Even nearby guests had begun to notice. Heads turned subtly, curiosity spreading like a quiet ripple across the room. The partners looked at each other in disbelief, their earlier laughter now heavy and uncomfortable. The tycoon felt a heat rise to his face, a feeling he rarely experienced. Embarrassment mixed with disbelief. His mind raced, trying to regain control, to find words that would restore his authority. But every thought collapsed before it reached his mouth. The waitress finally stopped speaking and stood still, hands gently resting on her tray. Her eyes were calm, not proud, not mocking, just honest. She didn't explain herself. She didn't defend her intelligence. She didn't ask for an apology. Her silence now carried more weight than her words. One of the partners cleared his throat awkwardly, attempting a weak smile, but it failed. The moment had already passed them by. Power had shifted without shouting, without insults, without drama. It had shifted through knowledge. The tycoon tried to laugh. A short, forced sound escaped him, but it felt empty. He muttered something about education and travel, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed him. It was no longer commanding. The waitress nodded politely, acknowledging his words without reacting emotionally. She thanked them for their patience and asked if they needed anything else. Her professionalism remained untouched, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Inside the tycoon, something cracked quietly. He had built his identity on superiority, on the belief that money equaled intelligence, that power meant control. Yet here he sat, exposed by someone he had dismissed without a second thought. Around them, the restaurant slowly returned to motion. Whispers replaced silence. Forks resumed moving, but the atmosphere had changed. Something important had been witnessed not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. The waitress turned to leave, but before she took a step, the tycoon spoke again. This time in English, his tone softer, uncertain. He asked how many languages she spoke. The question carried no mockery now, only curiosity mixed with humility. She paused briefly and answered simply. 7. Learned through study, travel, and necessity. She offered no details beyond that, then walked away, leaving the table behind. The tycoon stared at his plate, appetite gone. His partners avoided his eyes. The meal no longer mattered. The deal they had come to discuss felt distant and meaningless. For the first time in many years, the tycoon felt small. Not because someone insulted him, but because someone revealed a truth he had ignored for too long. Intelligence does not wear one face, and power does not belong to one class. The moment lingered long after the waitress disappeared into the kitchen. It stayed in the silence between words, in the pause before laughter, in the realization that respect could never be purchased. And at that table, surrounded by wealth and luxury, a single, calm voice, speaking 7 languages, had delivered the loudest lesson of all. The waitress didn't immediately return to the table. She stepped into the kitchen, a world of louder noises and a faster pace. Pans sizzled, orders were called out, and life continued as usual. But inside her, memories were stirring quietly. Memories she rarely shared with anyone. She washed her hands slowly, letting the cool water ground her. She had learned long ago how to separate moments like this from emotion. Not because they didn't matter, but because she had survived much harder ones. Moments where silence wasn't a choice, but a shield. She was born in a small coastal town, far from luxury restaurants and expensive suits. Her mother worked 2 jobs, yet still found time to teach her that words were doors and languages were keys. As a child, she listened more than she spoke, absorbing sounds, accents, and rhythms. She learned early that language could protect you, connect you, and sometimes even save you. School wasn't easy, and money was always short, but her curiosity was endless. She studied wherever she could in libraries, with borrowed books at community centers. She picked up languages the way others pick up habits, slowly at first, then naturally. English opened her world, French followed, then German. Each new language showed her a different way of thinking, a different way of seeing people. Her life took her across borders, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. She once worked as a translator, helping refugees navigate paperwork and assisting tourists who were lost and afraid. She saw kindness and cruelty in many forms, and learned that intelligence often lives in quiet places, unseen and underestimated. When family responsibilities called her back, she took work where she could find it. The restaurant job paid the bills, gave her stability, and allowed her time to care for those who depended on her. It was never a measure of her worth, just a chapter 1 she handled with the same discipline she gave to everything else. Back in the dining room, the tycoon sat in silence, replaying the moment again and again. The flawless German, the effortless shifts between languages. His mind searched for excuses, for coincidences, for anything to protect his wounded pride, but nothing fit. The truth remained sharp and unavoidable. He watched other servers move through the room and, for the first time, noticed how invisible they were to him before, how little he had ever wondered about their lives, their stories, their knowledge. The restaurant suddenly felt different, less like a stage for his importance and more like a place full of unseen depth. His partner spoke quietly about business, trying to regain a sense of normalcy, but he barely listened. The confidence that usually wrapped around him like a heavy coat now felt thin and fragile. He thought of all the times he had used language as a wall, a way to exclude, to mock, to dominate, and how easily that wall had just been dismantled. When the waitress returned to the floor, she continued working as she always had, polite, efficient, focused. Other guests smiled at her now, some with admiration, some with curiosity, but she didn't seek their attention. She didn't change her posture or her tone. She had nothing to prove. Her power wasn't in confrontation, but in her presence. She delivered desserts, refilled glasses, and moved through the room with quiet confidence. The tycoon finally looked up as she passed nearby. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, unsure of what words could undo what had already happened. Respect, he was learning, demanded more than an apology. It demanded awareness. He realized something uncomfortable. His wealth had introduced him to many people, but it had also blinded him. He had confused access with understanding, money with wisdom, and control with superiority. As the evening moved toward its end, the lesson remained heavy in the air. Not spoken aloud, but felt by everyone at that table. A lesson about assumptions, about silence, and about the danger of underestimating those who serve you. For the waitress, the night was almost over. She wiped tables, checked reservations for the next day, and prepared to leave. The moment with the tycoon didn't define her. It simply revealed what was already there. For the tycoon, however, the night had changed something much deeper. The world no longer felt as simple as it once did. The line between power and ignorance had blurred. And for the first time in a long while, he understood that true intelligence often speaks softly, waits patiently, and needs no permission to be heard. The tycoon remained seated long after the table was cleared. The restaurant slowly emptied, chairs scraped softly against the floor, and the lights dimmed, signaling the end of another elegant evening. Yet, inside him, nothing felt settled. The usual satisfaction that followed a successful dinner was gone. His partner stood, offering polite goodbyes, but their voices sounded distant. He nodded, his attention fixed on a single thought. A single moment that refused to fade. The calm voice, the perfect German, the quiet strength behind it all. He finally rose and walked toward the exit, passing tables where laughter still lingered. But it felt different now. Less impressive, less important. Outside, the cool night air met him, and for the first time in years, he welcomed the discomfort. It reminded him he was still capable of change. Over the following days, that moment followed him everywhere. In meetings, on private flights, in boardrooms filled with people eager to agree with him. He began to notice patterns he had ignored before. How often he interrupted, how quickly he judged, how easily he dismissed voices that did not sound like his own. He caught himself listening more, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The memory of the waitress served as a quiet reminder that intelligence does not announce itself, and that respect cannot be demanded, only earned. One afternoon, he returned to the restaurant alone, without partners or entourage. He sat at a simple table and waited, not knowing exactly why he was there, only knowing that something unfinished pulled him back. The waitress noticed him, but didn't react. She approached with the same professionalism as before, no fear, no expectation, just courtesy. She greeted him politely and asked for his order. This time, he looked at her fully, not as a server, not as a lesson, but as a person. He ordered simply, thanked her sincerely, and spoke with care. The words felt unfamiliar, but right. As the meal progressed, he didn't switch languages. He didn't perform. He just listened. When she returned to check on his table, he asked, respectfully, if she ever regretted being underestimated. The question was quiet, honest. She considered it briefly and answered calmly that being underestimated had never limited her. It only revealed the limits of others. Her life, she said, had been built on patience, education, and resilience, not on the opinions of strangers. The tycoon nodded, absorbing the truth in her words. He didn't apologize with grand speeches or excuses. Instead, he thanked her for the lesson she had never intended to teach. He left a generous tip, not as compensation, but as recognition. When he walked out, he felt lighter, not absolved, but aware. The world hadn't changed overnight, but his place in it had shifted just enough to matter. For the waitress, the encounter was already fading into memory, another moment in a life full of movement and meaning. She finished her shift, stepped into the night, and continued forward, unchanged and unburdened. Weeks later, the tycoon began supporting language education programs. Not publicly, not for praise, but quietly, intentionally. He funded scholarships, sponsored cultural exchanges, and encouraged diversity in the places he once controlled without a second thought. The lesson followed him not as shame, but as guidance. He learned that power used without humility is fragile, and intelligence without respect is empty. Years later, he would remember the table, the silence, and the calm voice that had spoken 7 languages without ever raising it. And he would remember how a single evening had taught him more than decades of success. And somewhere, in a city filled with noise and ambition, a waitress continued her journey, speaking many languages, but living one truth, that dignity needs no title, and wisdom often wears the most unexpected uniform. Thanks for watching.